30 years ago, it was a biopsychosocial model. Now it's a biopsychosocial spiritual model. And more and more, I think the people in the healing profession are recognizing that this is a part of who we are as people. There are social relations. There's the emotional and cognitive and what's going on in our head. There's a physical part, and then there's the bio part, and then there's also the spiritual part of us. And how it's expressed looks a lot different in a lot of different people. Some people express it through religion. Some people express it through going for a walk in the neighborhood when they're around trees, or going and sitting by the lake. The nature of stigma changes in different places. So in the US, if you look at the way mental illness is portrayed in the media and in the news, there seem to be some patterns that are there. One of them is that people with mental illness are dangerous. Another pattern is that they're kind of like simple, like little children, and need to be taken care of. Another one is that that people are unpredictable. And so those are kind of the tropes that we have in the US and in European societies. In other parts of the world, some of the concerns are about, if there's what does that say about my family? So is it in the blood? And so one of the fears is, if there's someone with a mental illness in the family, will the other people be able to make a good marriage? So will they be able to get married? Will they be able to marry well? So the different parts of the world, there are different kinds of concerns that pop up. Is that almost every culture has a word that roughly translates into madness. And we might call it, let's say, a psychotic break or something in this country. Other places would have different names on it, but it's almost every culture has a term that can translate into madness. And the nature of the illness is not a physical illness. It's a spiritual or a mind illness that people have. And there are several other kinds of things that go along with that. Even cultures where they believe in possession. So during a dance, for example, in a Balinese dance where the person takes on the spirit of a god, okay, people would say, okay, within this ceremony, this is fine. This is something that's expected, maybe even honored. If that were happening outside of it, in a different context, no, that's not all right. This is madness over here. So there are distinctions, even contextual distinctions, as to whether the person has a madness or whether it's something else that's going on. With Jews who were escaping Soviet Union, okay? And I remember there was one guy that the resident asked if I would come in and do an assessment. He had some concerns about the man, so I went in and asked some questions. And he was sad. He was clear. He was pretty depressed, but I didn't see any indication that he was having suicidal thoughts or anything. And a couple of days later, he committed suicide. And I remember that, I was like, well, what did I miss? And, I talked to a lot of the people that were around, and we had a really good Russian interpreter. And what did you notice anything? And nobody noticed anything, but I always have wondered, if I were more familiar with his culture, were there some things that I would have picked up on and would have seen that I wasn't aware of because I just wasn't familiar with the culture? There's another person whose grandmother committed suicide, and I remember her in particular because when she was in the hospital, And she just flat out said, look, I know what I have to say in order for you to let me out of here. But if I decide to kill myself, you can't do anything about it. I mean, she just said that. I was there when she said that to the psychiatrist. And, you know, she's right. She knew what to say. And were people concerned? Yes, people were concerned. But was there a clear medical necessity for keeping her in the hospital, especially when she had decided to sign herself out? And the answer was no, there really wasn't. And, you know, I can't remember whether it was weeks or months later, but yeah, she did commit suicide. So, and I think that we all, anytime anything like that has ever happened, it's like we go through like a series of stages of what did I miss? The same thing that I was telling you about. What was there something I would have picked up? And family members do that. You know, was this, and things, conversations that were kind of innocuous that nobody would have paid any attention to before, suddenly is, oh my God, was he trying to tell me something? And was there something that's there? And it's kind of, you know, we all do that. The healers of all kinds are just getting overwhelmed with the needs of the people who are sick, the responsibility of, let's say, or the burden of having to tell a family member that they can't go and be with their loved one as they're dying because of COVID restrictions. I mean, that's weighing down on the healers a lot. There's making healers put in a position where they have to make decisions that they're forced into, that they know in their own heart is ethically, morally wrong. They refer to that as moral distress. Initially, moral injury was something that was identified in combat veterans and military veterans, and they saw these same kinds of symptoms coming up in medical professionals. So someone being in a position of knowing that if that person has their family around them as they die, their passing may be easier, may be eased, and they will suffer less. But because of the restrictions that the staff are forced to enforce, they can't allow that. And it's like being put in a position where you're forced to do things that you know that you feel is wrong. The acute care facilities in mental health, where they bring someone in and it's a stabilization and discharge unit, where people get stabilized, and then, okay, now we need to discharge them, but are they ready to be discharged? Well, not really. Are they no longer actively suicidal? Yes, they're no longer actively suicidal. Are they a danger to themselves or others? No, they're not. Are they ready to be back out and on their own and not receiving care, especially now when trying to get appointments is really difficult? You know, everybody's overwhelmed. Almost every agency is looking for staff. And that's both mental health and medical. You know, people are leaving the field. They're leaving the field because of being overwhelmed. One of my friends has a daughter, one of my Vietnamese language school classmates has a daughter who's a nurse in West Virginia. And there was an article, I believe it was either Washington Post or New York Times, it was one of the national newspapers, about the situation where she is. She works in a hospital. She's a nurse in a hospital, and people who are the staff there are being abused by the people in the community. And there are people who come in the hospital. Don't you tell me I've got COVID. I don't believe that. Don't you tell me that. So that they're in a community that denies that. And so even when they're outside the hospital, sometimes there are people that come up there in the store and, you know, verbally denigrate or abuse them even then. I can't even imagine. You know, I really appreciate living in a part of the world where most people take this stuff seriously. I can't imagine what it would be like there, you know, where you've got people that you're trying to do your best to save them, and they're spitting on you. You know, so is it an art or is it a science? And the answer is yes. It's both. It's both. It's one of the things that I used to tell my students. I said, you spend a lot of time trying to develop your empathy and your intuition. You ignore your intuition at your own risk. Pay attention to that. Now, and don't take it for granted. Because if you get the intuition, gee, I don't think this is right, there's something going on here, pay attention to it. And then when it's all over, then go back and do the kind of critical self-reflection and ask yourself, what was it that I noticed that triggered my spidey senses there? What was it that I picked up on? What did they do? Because then the art, that intuition, then becomes a tool. We've come a ways. I remember when I first got into the field, the I don't know what the prevailing approach was, well, people need to move beyond their grief. And I think that we have, as a profession, as a society, have moved beyond that. That grief isn't something that you get over. It gradually changes over time, and that grieving is a process. And just because the person has died and is no longer there doesn't mean the relationship has died too. You still have a relationship with that person, but it's changed now. And I think that we're doing a better job with that in general than we used to.